Hey everybody, Andrew here, and I just wanted to make a quick announcement about this episode in particular, and that is our guest today has graciously provided us with a really cool offer, and I just wanted to provide some clarity on how to take advantage of it. So first things first, you need to listen to the whole episode to find out what that offer is. So that's part one. And then part two, if it is something that interests you, then you need to go to the show notes page. You can do that two ways. One, if you're listening to a mobile device, in the show description, there should be a link to the show notes page. And if not, then you can just go to rengenmarketing.com/353. And that will also take you to the show notes page. And once you get there, you want to scroll down to the bottom in the resources section, and then you will see a link which will take you to a Google form. Now, just letting you know, this offer is a first come, first served basis. So if you tuned in and it's something that you're interested in, I highly recommend that you take action as soon as possible because these are limited. So that's all I got for today. And just again, thank you all for being such great listeners. And now let's get right back to the show. Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, and we're going to be talking about navigating the publishing landscape. Now, currently, it's a struggle to determine what exactly is a right path to get a publisher for your project, especially knowing that publishers are more selective than ever, while the number of projects keep growing. So that's why today we're going to discuss the challenges and opportunities, learning expert insights on how to identify publishers, perfecting your pitch, and what you should expect in this ever-changing climate so you can confidently navigate the publishing landscape. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey, everybody, and we're back. And today with us, I have Jay Powell with us. Jay, how is it going, buddy? It's great to have you on the show today.
It is a wonderful day up here in the mountains, and we're starting to get pollen. So that's always wonderful as well.
Oh, pollen. Yes, pollen season. Oh, man. I have a friend of mine who every time that the pollen season happens, it's like he gets like flu-like or horrible, and he's out for like a month. So, hopefully it's not like that with you or other people you know, but yeah, pollen season, folks, is not fun, which I'm sure you can all relate. But anyways, we're not here to talk about pollen. We are here to talk about some fun and really interesting things that are all very important to us. But first, before we do that, why don't we get to know Jay a little bit? So he is the CEO of the Powell Group, and he's also the founder of Indie Game Business. So they provide video game consulting on business development, publishing support, and licensing. But I am really also curious, Jay, what is Indie Game Business? I'm sure a lot of our listeners are familiar with it, but for those who aren't, what is that?
Indie Game Business is my hobby that has grown completely out of control. That's basically what sums it up. So it started, we formally started it back in 2018, so we're going on 6 years now. It basically is the result of my frustration that no one teaches developers about business. And so I finally just had that, Thanos moment where I just said, F it, I'll do it myself. And I'm trying to not hit that explicit thing with us today. We started it as a Twitch channel, and it was essentially me calling up friends of mine in the industry, because we had you on very, very early on as well. Just to say, okay, let's talk about marketing. Let's talk about pitching to a publisher. Let's talk about how you get an IP for your game, just like that. And it went from, in the course of a year, it went from a Twitch channel to a podcast to the point where we were simulcasting it, the recordings of it every week on YouTube, Facebook, back we're still on Twitch, and LinkedIn is where it is now. So you can watch it every week live, or you can just catch the podcast. But we did that, and I sat back and said, okay, well, we basically got an avenue for these developers to learn about this stuff without having to pay 10 grand to go to, San Francisco and buy vault access to all the GDC stuff. I said, well, we haven't solved the problem of how we get them to, actually meet with publishers or marketing firms or, any of the support they need. So in what would appear to be some great visionary moment, we started doing digital conferences in 2019. And I assure you, it was not some great, I know a pandemic coming type thing. It was just like, this is going to be easier. And so by the time the pandemic hit, we had already done 3 digital conferences. And then we kept doing them through the pandemic. And when everybody went back to live conferences, a lot of people left the space. We didn't. And so as a result, our 17th digital conference is coming up in September. It's basically indie game business is there as a resource to learn, but also as an avenue to open up opportunities for, developers to learn about this stuff. But at the same time, go out and pitch to investors and pitch to publishers and talk to marketing reps and all this sort of stuff. It is, I've been doing this for 25 years, and indie game business is probably the thing that I'm the most proud of out of my career. Our Discord's got 75. We're approaching 8,000 people, industry professionals on the Discord. The newsletter hits almost 12,000 people a week. It is absolutely my hobby that went completely haywire and out of control.
Yeah. And I mean, there's just so many good things about that. And folks, I'm sure those of you who are already part of that community are aware that it's just full of great people, great resources. There's the podcast. I mean, one thing I particularly love too, and actually I recommend this to all my clients. So I don't think Jay knew about this prior to. And for those of you listening, I think it's a great thing. But anybody who's looking for like pitch help, they have some great, it's either weekly or bi-weekly or whatever the cadence is. They have these like pitch walkthroughs where people are actually giving their pitch decks and having them critiqued by publishers and professionals doing that stuff. And that's probably one of the most, I think, great assets of this community, but it's just one of, right? There's so many other things in there. So
it is. And it's one of the, I have to think Ash, our community manager / marketing PR guru, this was something that she decided that, we should do on the Discord. And so what happens, it is weekly, unless our panel has like a conference or something coming up. But generally every week you can go on the Discord, you sign up, the pitch decks are done in order that they come in, essentially, assuming they meet the requirements. And every Thursday at 2:00 Eastern, they sit down and they'll pull up one of the pitch decks and go through it right there live on the Discord. So, and give feedback. So it's either you can send yours in and sit there and hang out and watch and, get the feedback, or, what happens is dozens of people log in and just to watch and listen. So you don't even have to have a pitch deck.
Yeah.
The interesting thing about that is, so we did one for our last conference, which was in February. Omar from Firestoke and I did a live one on YouTube. So if you want to know what it is we're talking about, you can now go to our YouTube page for Indie Game Business. And if you look in the conference sessions for last time, there's one that we did live and it's out there, and the developers consented to us having, putting it out there in front of God and everybody, which I was like, could not thank them enough, because that's hard. I mean, that's very hard to sit down and say, this is the pitch deck that we're putting out to publishers and investors, and we want you all to crucify it right here, on YouTube in front of, and we're going to start doing that next week. So like the second week of May, we'll be doing that once a month, having one that's public like that. So, because otherwise they're just on Discord, they're not recorded.
Yeah.
The ones that are there, and it stays in that little ecosystem. Yeah. But we're starting to do a monthly one. Omar and I are going to do them on YouTube. And it is, we do that. We have monthly talks on, people do feedback on their Steam Deck pages.
Yep.
I mean, not Steam Deck pages, Steam pages. And we just started one with an attorney as well. So, it's a good resource.
Yeah. So folks, don't worry. We're going to drop the link to that Discord in the show notes. And all that talk about pitching and publishers and stuff are kind of what we're here to talk about today. So I'm really excited to dig into that. But before we do that, first, we're going to have Jay go through the Q Box round. And for those of you who aren't familiar, the Q Box round is just a series of quick, random little questions I prepared here for Jay. So, Jay, are you ready for the Q Box round?
Always.
I love these answers from all the guests. Like, always, yes, let's go. Okay. First, name one thing that motivates you every day.
Being a good dad. I've got one son, husband. Wife and I've been married 20 years, so she's dealt with everything from me. And then, just helping these indie devs, get out there and, have a chance to shine and to grow. I'm one of those weird people that truly actually loves my job. And so I get to get up and do this every single day. I don't have a exit round planned or any sort of retirement. It's like, I could do this forever. I absolutely love this stuff.
Yeah, and it's always great to hear those things too, that you're able to achieve that, but not just achieve that, but it's like, I just love hearing people that are in that space that are really passionate about what they do in this industry. So, and whoever you are and whatever you're doing, it's always great to hear those stories. So thanks for sharing that. All right, next, what's one thing that most people don't know about you?
I have no formal business training. I have a degree in English literature from the University of North Carolina. So I learned all of this business stuff on the job, doing it, no training whatsoever. And so one of the goals from Indie Game Business is hopefully the rest of you don't have to learn it that way. But yeah, took one business class my entire college career, and I'm pretty sure I got a D in it. So yeah.
But you know what, folks? I mean, I feel like that's probably a lot of us in some way, shape, or form. I mean, I went to film school. I never took any business. I never took anything business related. It was just, like you said, on the job, you learn these things, you listen to things, and then next thing you know, you start getting a sense for it. So really interesting and cool. All right. And the last and the staple here on the show is, what game are you playing now?
A lot. Fallout 4 again. Decided to do a sim settlement run, and of course got excited again by the Amazon series. RimWorld, Helldivers 2. Was playing a little bit of Fortnite. I've switched that over to Overwatch 2 now that they made it free to play. Just started Manor Lords and a little bit of Stardew Valley in the evening to unwind. I am unfortunately one of those rare executives in this industry who also plays a ton of games.
Yeah, no, that's a good set right there in terms of, and that's like current, like it's not like, oh, this is my lineup, this is basically what I'm doing like every other day or whatever. So yeah, I'd say that's pretty impressive. That might be the record on the show, actually. I might have to do that. I might have to look back and be like, okay, what's the most anybody laid out? And I think this is it right here. So
you obviously need more guests with ADD.
Awesome. Well, hey, Jay, thank you for sharing that. Love it. Now, as we were kind of talking about in a different context, but we were, about pitching and publishers and stuff. That's what we're here to talk about. And it's especially now more than anything. It's super important to be mindful of. We know this is a big deal for a lot of us that are out there trying to get support and land some of these partnerships. So navigating the publishing landscape is always tricky, always has been. And it feels like it's getting more tricky, but maybe we'll dive into it to find out maybe while some things are changing, they're not. Like an expression I've been using a lot these days is, the playing field's the same, just the game might be a little bit different, right? So let's see if that's still the case or not. So to kick things off, how would you say that the landscape of indie game publishing has evolved in recent years? And I guess what trends do you foresee shaping the industry in the future?
We always talk about how there's, cycles the industry goes through. And, over since like the late 90s, I've seen several of these cycles come through. And we're still seeing the cycles. They're just happening faster, basically. So you're not wrong. It is harder to get a deal now. One thing that a lot of people believe that isn't actually true, there aren't really less publishers than there have been,
Okay.
Especially in the first quarter of this year, I saw about half a dozen new publishers pop up. And so we track, this is a little bonus of Indie Game Business. We track all the publishers and investors in the industry. You can go to indiegamebusiness.com and download that list for free. It's like 1,400 companies. The investor side is much bigger because we went a little wider. But so we do have a year-to-year run. And so we can look back and say, okay, this is how many publishers are out there now. This is how many, have been in past. There haven't, we've seen publishing houses close, but we've also seen a lot more open. And so it's more of a case of you're really, really competing against other indie devs. And, for, that seeing getting the attention of the scouts, all that sort of good stuff. And so it's really important when you go out and you're pitching that you get off on the right foot. You don't go and send something that isn't what that publisher wants to see, or it's not what they're looking for in the first place, or you don't have the right information in there. But it's also equally important once you get a publishing deal that you don't squander it. And, we see that happen quite a bit as well. Things like production get off track or whatever. And a lot of developers will get excited by the fact that they have a publisher that's really hands off. That's not always a good thing.
Yeah.
That can actually backfire in many ways, shape, and form. So in terms of what we've seen in the last couple of years, obviously the Embracer mess, put a kink in a lot of things. Mm-hmm. And, the overall investment side of the U.S. is, interest rates are high, so it's harder to do stuff. But there are a lot of options out there, in terms of publishers. The trend that I see, in the last few months, and then what I think we're going to see a lot more of in the next year or so, is a lot of indie devs with successful titles becoming publishers. Mm-hmm. There's 3 of them off the top of my head that I can, 2 of them that have popped up in the last quarter that went from being, okay, we're just a developer, or one of them in one case was a fund that was like a VC fund that said, okay, wait, we're going to spin out a publishing arm as well. The best example that I can give you for that is Coffee Stain. They took basically what a lot of us refer to in the industry as a havoc physics, experiment in Goat Simulator, turned it into a great game, got really successful, and then they started publishing. And they ended up getting bought by, a couple of studios as well. But it's that sort of thing that we're seeing happen. Developers that have self-published, they had a lot of success, and then they turn around and say, okay, let's help other people. Landfall's doing it, Shiro Games is doing it. There are several of them out there, but that's the biggest thing that I see in terms of indie publishing, is that you're going to see more of these publishers come up from indie developers.
There's a lot of interesting things in what you said there too, because in the first one that stood out was, it sounds like in general there might be this belief that there's less publishers, but it's not so much that there's less. It might mean more of. It sounds like possibly a misconception because, well, yes, there are other things like you called out to, like, economics essentially. Where maybe funds might not be as openly dispersed as they have been, or they're, whatever's being done on that front. It's not so much that the opportunities don't exist. It's just like little different things are changing. Because I thought that was interesting. I'm like, wait, people are actually thinking there's less publishers? That's it's funny, but I think through that conversation, folks, we can kind of hear or see, or maybe read between the lines on how people might make connect those dots, but not necessarily in the correct manner. So I think that's really interesting too. But again, like to your calling out too, especially from an indie level, I've seen this all the time. I feel like, because when you said less publishers, I'm like, what? I'm seeing them pop up all the time, and then you're like, yeah, there are, just called out to it. So this is great because, folks, what we're saying here is, yeah, times are tough and everything else, but there's still lots of opportunities. I think Jay called that out pretty, and for someone who has their pulse on this thing, like they have that resource that he called out to, I mean, that it just makes sense. So that's great and everything, but you also were talking about something I want to dive into more about. Okay, great. there's lots of opportunities, lots of publishers out there. There's new ones popping up every day, probably at a greater rate than the ones that are closing. But what does it come to in finding the right publisher? Just because there's lots of them available doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is going to be the right one. You called out to other things like, hey, hands off, great, we have full control. And you're like, yeah, that might not be a good thing. It all depends. So why don't I'm curious then, what would you say are some key strategies or even just tips that, whether it's indie game developers, studios, solos, whatever, when it comes to finding the right publishers for their projects?
So, I mean, the biggest mistake that we see people making is they don't realize how many options that they have. To clarify on the publisher side, it's not that there's less publishers; it's that you're competing against more developers. Some of these companies are getting 3,000 submissions a year. So you think about it, that's like 10 games being submitted to them every single day. We started on the Powell Group side. We started scouting for publishers about 3 years ago. And we just internally, we have a database of over 4,000, approaching 5,000 games that we have found or that they were sent to us. So that's the problem for indie devs. It's you have to be that much better when you're pitching. The first key to that is making sure that you know all your options. And so this is why we do that publisher list. I'll talk to developers and say, okay, they're like, well, we got this game, but we haven't found a publisher for it, and we pitched it to everybody. And I'm like, okay, well, how many is everybody? And they're like, oh, right. Like 15 or 20 publishers. And I'm like, okay, so you only missed roughly 100, and that's going to depend on, how many are, what fits. And that fit part is the important thing. So, what we tell folks is grab that publisher list, and then you have to do some work on this. You can't just send your game to Devolver and call it a day. You sit down and you look at these publishers and say, okay, do they publish on the same platform that we're publishing for? Are you sending your PC game to a mobile publisher? Because that's a gigantic waste of time. Are they working in the genres that are that we're working in, or they publish games that are similar to ours? Best example of that right now, Paradox for years has done this. Everybody knows that's the grand strategy game. Hooded Horse has nailed it in the last couple of years. Folks know that the strategy, the sim, the management games, that's what they do, and that's what they do well. That's what you want to look for. We're going to see more and more of these niche publishers pop up because that's where you gain traction. That's where they build their community. That's the way it was 20 years ago. Now it's going to come around again. But making sure that the publishers that you're identifying work with the genres that you're going to look at and say at price point. Is this publisher that they only release things under $20 and I have a game that's going to be a $40, $50, $60 game? Or is the other true? And it's like, I have a game that's going to launch for like $15, $20 and this publisher only does things in the, 40, 50, 60 rounds. So you've got to make sure that publisher's on the same page there. And then, it's a matter of just actually asking hard questions when you're talking, if that publisher's interested and you start getting to the contract phase, you want to understand who your producer is. That publisher is there to make your game better, because they don't make any money either if you don't. And, we've always had that big strife. It's like, oh, developers versus publishers. Publishers are evil. I ain't gonna lie, some of them are. I know there are some that we keep on a blacklist, and no, I'm not sharing who that is. But that's always the next question. Developers like, who is it? I'm like, I'm not saying.
We're not there for
that. But there are there. There's especially these publishers that are coming from development studios. These teams care and they're passionate and they want to help you succeed. And having a publisher being involved is what's going to help you take your game to that next level, because they're out there. They understand, the market conditions. They understand price points, consumer buying behavior. The publishers that are just like, hey, look, we're going to give you some money and stand back and let you do your thing. If you're successful and you've done this a lot, that's maybe fine. But especially to newer devs, that can pretty much be a death sentence. And I've seen it happen. We do audits for publishers and investors where we come in and look at their projects. And I see these ones that are way, way off track. And the developer's like, yeah, they just let us do what we wanted. And I'm like, yeah, and see, now you're in trouble. But understanding how many options that you have and then doing that extra little bit of research is basically the main thing that's going to get you off on the right foot.
Yeah. You called out a really good point. So one I want to say too, just to even add to it and provide an example, is the price point. I had a client not too long ago where they were working with this publisher. Is kind of, it didn't seem like it over time that it was really the right fit. And I think from what I understand, the track record of this particular one in terms of the other games, the price point was significantly lower. And this is why I think it's important why Jay called out, and this is just one scenario, but just an example where now the developer was being led into believe that they should sell their game at this price. And when I was working with them, I'm like, but you have a much more premium product than this. And what they're suggesting is half of what you could probably get. That's a significant damper on your margins there. So it's like that's very limiting on like all sorts of stuff, right? More than we probably like to think about when we're getting passionate about creating these games. But still, and I was like, no, you guys need to up your price now. And they went back to the whole team talked about it, and they're like, thank you. We've been wanting to hear this all along, but we just didn't,
But it's like so many developers think that, it's like the iTunes store when it first came out, and it was this whole race to the bottom. And if I sell my game for $5, it's going to sell more. It's not. I am constantly telling developers you should never release a game under $20. That's the point. And there's two reasons for it. One, we did an audit for I would say AA, III publisher back towards the end of last year, where we came in and looked at like their entire slate, 14 games, and then we did projections for them based on what we saw. And one of the things that came out of it was that publisher was launching their games too cheap, because we could sit and prove that they would actually sell more units if the price point was $5 higher than it was. It stands to make sense. It's like, oh, you'll make more money if the price is higher. But no, we were talking, we actually move more units with a higher price. The other reason, and this is the more concrete, tangible side of it, is the majority of your unit sales on Steam or on Epic or wherever come from discounts. Steam sales, NextFest not really, but Steam sales basically. And if you launch your game at $10, there's only so much you can cut. You don't have that opportunity.
Exactly.
If you launch your game higher, you're still going to discount it, down to 15, 10 or whatever, but you've got more options and you're going to be able to sell more units by having that higher price point that you can start from.
Yeah.
And so, I'm with you. I'm constantly telling devs, it's like, don't launch your game at $9. Sure as hell don't launch it at $5. You want to aim for a $20 minimum and then go from there.
Yeah. And, folks, it can be case by case, but I would say majority of the time it's you got to look at things that way. You really need to consider your margins and think of what are those other goals that you might have. Hey, if your monetization strategy is a little bit different or whatever else, like I said, case by case, but still, if you're working with someone that units is a priority, maybe understand why that's a priority for them and how does it align with you? Because if those things don't, then that sounds like at least one example of how that might not be a good fit for you. And so many things to consider.
To be clear, Andrew, I do not condone launching a new version of your game at $250. Like, other... We're not going to go into names here, but there is a limit to this. And somewhere I'm going to put that Goldilocks zone somewhere between $20 and $250.
All right.
But yeah, there's a limit to how far you can push it.
There definitely is. I think it comes down to what is that value and what is that perceived value, and does it align with that price? Because that I don't know. Hey, you know what? If you're looking to do I don't know, just to get some quick attention grab. I don't recommend this, but man, list a game for $1,000. See what happens. This will be a fun
Well,
experiment.
there's that old adage in the free to play market of you should always have something in your game that costs $100. And fair enough. If you want to, if somebody's willing to spend it, be ashamed not to give them that opportunity. But yeah, that soft spot is somewhere between $20 and $250.
All right. I like we have a good range though. That's
it's good. We're gonna keep it tight.
All right. Sweet. All right. Well, we've talked. I think we have a good idea now, even though there's probably any number of other things we could talk about, like what it takes to find the right publisher. But again, make sure it aligns with values, all these things. Like just make sure what you're doing your research to help you determine what is a right fit. But let's say people have done that and they still haven't come up with anybody. It just things don't pan out, whatever the case is. So when studios or devs start losing traction on the publisher front, and they get to a point where, all right, maybe we're going to start, considering self-publishing. Do you have any particular guidelines or other things that, these teams or people should consider if they decide to go that route?
This falls under the hope for the best, plan for the worst. And so you should always be thinking about what if we have to self-publish, because it is, very possible that, we had a talk a couple of maybe a year ago on the show of you can do everything right and still fail.
Yeah.
And while that is the most discouraging session title ever, it's true. And so you can have a great game that for whatever reason didn't catch the eye of the right publishers and you have to self-publish. The absolute main thing is get a marketing partner. Do not try to go and, especially if you've never done this. If you have self-published stuff in the past, you know what you're getting into. You even probably know what you did wrong or right the last time. But, for first-time devs, it's not rocket science to self-publish. This is not like the old days when I started where you had to sell it to a distributor who had to sell it to Walmart, who had to sell it to somebody else.
Yeah.
You have $100, you make a Steam page. Not rocket science. But the two things that often get overlooked, one is marketing. Yes, you need it. Yes, it needs to be a part of your development plan, and budget. I can't tell you how many developers come to me and they're like, hey, we're launching in 3 months and we don't have a publisher. So we're going to self-publish, but we don't have any marketing money. And I'm like, well, okay.
How much time do you have?
That's not going to go well for you. But the other one is community. I mean, you need to be building your community from day one. The minute you have something to show, whether it's a GIF or a screenshot or whatever, get it out there. Start building a Discord, start building an email newsletter list, because it's never going to hurt you. In one case, it's going to help you get a publisher because you're going to be able to show that there is already interest in the game.
Mm-hmm.
On the other side, if no publisher bites and you're still going to take this thing to, completion and launch it, you've got a start in your marketing right there. But it's without a doubt, I mean, you need to obviously be thinking of, all the things that publishers do. QA, don't... I had a developer tell me one time that they didn't need to send their game to QA because the lead programmer said there were no bugs in it. And
okay.
I nearly died. And sure enough, that build got sent to Apple and it failed the very first test. The very first test that Apple does, it failed. You got to be thinking QA. You got to be thinking porting, getting it to other consoles. And then, marketing. That's the big stuff. And so, yes, unless you don't have $100, there's no reason you can't go and self-publish, but you need to understand what you're getting into and how many other games are out there and what you've got to do. So get a market. If you do nothing else, get a marketing partner. We had Renee Gittins on the show last week, and she just launched, Potions of Curious Tale, and then got internet famous because she had a TikTok where she was just in tears because she had worked 10 years off and on this project. launched it on International Women's Day, and then the same day EA dropped 12, Command and Conquer, but basically EA dropped their entire back catalog onto Steam, and where she went from being, pretty high up there on the new and noteworthy list to not appearing at all. Now, things have turned around. She's actually seeing more success now, but that's because her post went viral. But you're dealing with a lot of market conditions that you don't control.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't put yourself in the best place possible by doing marketing, you're not going to get seen.
Yeah. And, there's so many things to unpack here, but we unfortunately don't have the time for it. But like, there's a lot to be said there. Now, I know some people out there, and I've seen this, and I'm sure you've seen it too, Jay, where you have extremists that are all about the passion and everything else and the art of it, and that's fine. But at some point, whether you're making connection and how marketing can still support those feelings and drive and everything else, or you have to make that switch, not saying like you're now just doing marketing, but more so of like in your brain, okay, yes, there's got to be some business side to this too, in addition to your drive and passion, unless you're just a hobbyist and you're making for yourself and that's perfectly fine. But one way, shape, form, or another, you have to, I hate saying it this way, but come to terms that marketing is needed, but it doesn't mean it's going to kill any of your passion and drive. If anything, it's going to support it, right?
I tell developers all the time, it's like, if you're doing this as a hobby or for the art, you don't have to listen to me.
Yeah, I love that one. That's a good one.
If you want to actually make a career out of this, you're going to have to learn the business side of doing it so you can support yourself and quit your day job or, grow your company or whatever. But yeah, I mean, marketing is an absolute, you look at, for the last 10 years, the number of games launched on Steam every year has risen and risen and risen, and it's not going to stop. It's going to continue. So you need to do everything in your power to stay ahead of that curve.
I want to share a quick funny story with everyone here today. I happened to meet one of these extremists that were all about art, passion, and everything. And it was a conversation that was going on in the Discord community. And at one point, it got to the point where he was even cracking his own jokes about how indie was and how art focused he was. He was like, I don't live in society. I live in a cabin in the woods or whatever, making my games, right? And it got to the point where one of us cracked a joke saying, here's an abacus. But you know what? It's not indie enough because they use metal rods.
Yes.
It's like, I mean, we're all kind of laughing about it, but unfortunately, unfortunately, from my perspective, I'm like, there's definitely some truth here, and it's almost like a sad truth if we get that caught up in this the belief of only art prevails. And while yes, it's like a romanticized version of that, it's not always the case, and shouldn't.
And here's the thing: it's like you don't if you're that artist and that passionate person, that's fine. You don't even have to not be that person, but you do need to like hire somebody or bring somebody and get some help in there to get it out, because you're going to keep doing the same thing. You're going to be working your regular day job and doing this on nights and weekends, or you're basically going to run out of money and have to go get a real job. And let's face it, none of us want a real job. That's why we're in this industry in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, and those types of things too can lead out to burnout too. It's like you're always passionate about this one thing, and it's funny because a lot of times, and we've talked about this on the show before, but a lot of times we think of burnout as, oh, it's a cultural thing. It's like, not near it. If you're so strongly passionate about something and then it doesn't go your way, then I mean, that's a way to lose a passion. That's a way to that's one way of burnout. There's so many other forms of it, and it's burnout is multifaceted. There's different areas and stuff. One other thing before we go on to the next topic, though, I want to call to that I thought was interesting is when you're talking about like, hey, you have stuff, you got whether or not you have a publisher. Just assume that you won't get one because you're going to be better prepared, right? Like prepare for the worst, like you said. And then, but when you're getting to that point, because it's funny, I just had this conversation yesterday with someone who had the same struggle. They're like, well, should I do this and all this stuff? And here's I think an important part. The more you can do, great. However, look at it from just working within your means. Because sometimes we see what everybody else is doing. We're like, oh, we need to do all of that. The point is, you might not be able to, and that's okay. But would it be nice? Of course. Would it be nice if I could do 20 million things at once? Who wouldn't, right? But the reality is that's not always the case. So work within your means and work up from that. But don't not do anything. But don't try to do too much because again, it's hard to do. And I think people struggle with that too sometimes. Kind of like I say this on the show a lot, compare and despair, if you will. So
yeah. I mean, let's face it. I love my job. I get burned out. I mean, it's just a reality of everything. But if you're doing, a lot of even the minimal stuff, you're still going to get noticed. I mean, I would put my scouting team up against, anybody in the industry, and we've been hired by everybody from indie devs all the way up to big companies. I don't even realize where they're pulling some of this stuff. I accused Danelle of just witchcraft in the way she finds some of these games out there, but she does. I mean, even if you're starting out and you're doing nothing but a screenshot Saturday or whatever, or the pitch your game trend on X, that Liam's project right there is fantastic. If you're getting out there in some way, shape, or form, you're gonna get found. Now, obviously, the more you do, the better that's going to be.
Right.
But sitting and doing nothing and hoping that old saying of, "Oh, well, a good game will sell." No, it doesn't. That's not the way it works all the time. And then the flip side of it too is you can't put too much credence on the whole solo developer thing. Yes, Stardew Valley did it, but also look at all the support that he's got from publishing companies and porting companies. Manor Lords, the latest one, solo dev, but he had a publisher along the way to handle all the stuff that he didn't want to deal with. So do something.
Yeah.
The more you can do, the better, but don't sit back and create your game in a vacuum.
So I have one other quick story, and then we're going to go on to the next one about that similar concept, different industry. Kevin Smith, the guy who
the first, God, I love Kevin Smith.
The first guy who did what was it? It was Clerks. That was, I think, the debut film.
I have a signed movie poster from him and Jason Mewes.
Okay, cool. Well, the story, how from what I recall, and I'm pretty sure this is accurate, how he got noticed and got to where he was he was made Clerks. It wasn't doing well. He was just buying up cheap or buying spaces at cheap theaters to get the movie out. And what happened was there's a producer or executive, someone staying at a hotel on business trip. He had indigestion. He just he had a stomach bug or something. I don't know what he had, but he couldn't go to sleep. He's like, I just want to kill the time. I guess I'll go across the street at this crappy theater and see what they got playing just because I need to do something else other than just lying here. And he saw Clerks. He liked it. And then next he was like, all right, who made this? And boom. Like, that's all it took. So I think it's sometimes we don't think about the possibility of those things. And I don't know to what extent Kevin Smith was doing back at that time, but still, he was getting into wherever he could within his means. And then that's where he got noticed and picked up and everything else. And the same thing you called out, like how your scouts find these people. Like, I don't know how they do it, but it's because someone did something to put it out there.
Even if it's just, you've got little local conferences that you don't think are going to be that many people there, I assure you somebody's got their pulse on that. And so do what you can, do something. The more you can do, the better.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Lots of great ideas and things like that. But now I want to kind of go back to what we were talking about a little bit before about like just pitching, right? And yeah, we talked briefly or mentioned how, the conditions of things have changed. Maybe, publishers have, put kind of, put some restraints on their piggy banks and whatnot, right? And things like that. And the competition's higher because they're maybe limited on what they want to do for projects and whatever their reasons are. So under these current conditions, could you walk us through some typical steps involved with preparing and executing a pitch to a publisher? So we obviously went through kind of the research phase and who's the right publisher, but now we kind of narrow those things down. Maybe we have some conversations. So now as we're preparing for this next stage or this pitch, what are some other things that we should consider going into that?
I'm cheating and pulling up my online class here because we actually this is one of the things that we cover. We've got free online classes on indie game business, and this is exactly one of the things that we do. So you take your list, you narrow it down like we talked about earlier, and then the next biggest thing is that pitch deck. That pitch deck will make or break you. Same with going with a good trailer. The key things that you need to have in that pitch deck is who you are, overview of the basics, what are your unique selling points, and that's harder than it used to be, because it's hard to have something truly unique now. But what are the things that make you stand out from other games in the genre? The best example I can give you is Fortnite. Honestly, look, battle royale is not a unique selling point anymore. I mean, even Fortnite brought it from PUBG, which got it from Rust, and there's a track record there. But what makes that one different is aside from the IP stuff, I'm not even thinking that's a thing now. But when it first started, building and destructing, buildings, that's the main thing that no other battle royale does. That they all have 15 different types of ammunition or weapons, and you drop onto a landmass that constricts while you're trying to eliminate the players. That's all. Those are features. That's not a unique selling point. Unique selling point is you can build stuff and you can break stuff. For that anyway. Go a little bit into your story and the background. We do not need the Silmarillion version of your lore. Have a good trailer or gameplay video. Put some concept art and screenshot in it. Put your schedule and budget in it. A little company profile, the experience of your team leads. Publisher doesn't need to know who everybody on the team is. Their main concern is lead programmer, lead artist, lead designer, producer, just the people that are, at the top. If you've got what we call that social media footprint, and that's where you put in how many followers you have on those different social media platforms, how big your Discord is, all that sort of stuff. And then oddly, the most important that we have to constantly remind people to do, contact information. I can't tell you how many games we find that, the developer gives you no way of getting in touch with it, or they do, and then they never respond. And it's even more frustrating when they're like, hey, we're looking for a publisher. It's like, okay, hey, you have no way of reaching you. That's the problem. But you have to put all of that in a deck that's under 15 slides. You send a publisher a deck that's like 30, 40 slides, and you're going to get a whole ton of like eye rolls because no one wants to go through it. And it's the same with your trailer. Look at the way social media tracks ads on Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube or wherever. 5 seconds. They consider anybody who watches a video for 5 seconds a viewer. And so you have to keep in mind, you have 5 seconds to get that publisher's interest. And if you don't do it, they're just going to move on to the next one because they have plenty of options these days. But yeah, so getting a great pitch deck, putting it in front of the right people at the publisher. And if they have, a lot of people will like skip an online submission form and try to go directly to, the scout or the acquisitions manager or something like that. You still need to do that online form because 99 times out of 100, that form is the first feed into a pipeline for that publisher. I have developers send me their games directly all the time. And I'm like, no. If you do that, it's going to get lost in my inbox. Here, we have a form where you can submit, use that, and then, tell me you did it so I can keep on the lookout. And that's what you should do with a lot of these publishers. If you have a friend at that publisher or just somebody submit through whatever their normal pipeline is and then say, hey, Jay, heads up, I just, submitted this game. Can you be on the lookout for it? But finding the right person at that publisher or, to go to, and then following up. I cannot tell you in 25 years how many deals I've gotten because I followed up 2 or 3 times with the publisher. People get busy. People are traveling. People get sick. They may not always respond to your first email. Your email may end up in their spam for some reason, but you need to follow up at least twice and not like within 4 days. give it a week, give it 2 weeks actually sometimes, and then follow up. I talked to a publisher, into last year. Their pipeline to sign a new project was 6 to 8 months from the time it was submitted. Now, that is long. Even all of us, at the hotel that night were like, oh my God. But, typically you have to figure it's going to take around 4 months from the time that you submit everything that publisher needs to see in order to make a decision to the time you sign, pen to contract. You're looking at about 4 months. But, get your pitch deck nailed down, get your trailer nailed down, and send it to the right person and follow up with that person.
I love all these points, and what I'm going to try to distill it to is basically an ongoing theme here on the show. Those of you who listen regularly will recognize it real quick. It's just empathy. But in this case, we're practicing empathy from, the publisher's perspective. Put yourself into their shoes. If you're getting a pitch deck that's 40 slides, are you going to want to read it? Probably, right? If you get a contact, or if you find something that looks like a really cool game and there's no way to access the game or talk to the developer about it, like, is that going to be helpful? No. Is like, and start asking those types of questions. Put yourself in their shoes and start answering the questions that you might have in those cases. And yes, you might not know all or you can't answer everything that they would be able to, right? And their answers are going to be very different across the board with other publishers too. But at a high level, just start doing that, because everything that Jay called out is just, if you really think about it, can be done as an easy exercise yourself to at least point you in the right direction. Now, there's going to be more intricate things and more details that you might want to put in there, but a lot of it at a high level isn't no different than how maybe you would probably approach things in a just a slightly different way. And I think practicing that empathy and everything that Jay just called out to is essentially that. Just like, think about what they're looking for, what they want, and what do you have, and does that align? Because if it doesn't, either change some things, or maybe you just need to find a better fit, or whatever else might be that next course of action.
Bingo.
Awesome. Well, we talked a lot today, and there was just so many awesome, great things that we discussed. I know there could be a lot more, but thankfully there's a lot of other ways that we can fill in those blanks. Again, quick call out to Indie Game Business. But first, before we do anything else, I'd like to, Jay, from everything we discussed, do you have any like tips, suggestions, or recommendations just based on our conversation today?
If you don't know, just ask. And if you don't have the resources, hire somebody. That's the big benefit. I mean, this is a business. At the end of the day, this is a business. It's a fun business. We love it, despite, the heartache and ulcers and everything else, but it's still a business. And so, that's why we have, the whole Indie Game Business Initiative. It's to help developers and not cost them a fortune. Here's my shameless plug. If you want professional help, that's what we do on the consulting side. We work with everybody from indie devs all the way up. We'll give you an audit on your project. We'll go through and give you feedback. We'll even go through and give you a direct list of the publishers that you should speak to, instead of having to go through our list and figure it out on your own. But, the reality is you have to look at it from the side of, this is a business. And you have to be doing everything that you possibly can in, the best way, shape, and form to get your game out there and to get it noticed and, to get it to market. And so whether that's building your community from day one, or approaching the right publishers, or even having a pitch deck that's somewhat recognizable, all of that stuff factors in. And yeah, that's just the reality of it. But again, if you're a hobbyist or you're just doing this for the art, you don't have to listen to us.
Yep, exactly.
It's only if you want to do this as a real career and grow a company and get to keep doing it.
Awesome. Well, great stuff there. Appreciate it. And before we go, before you let us know on where people can reach out or links and stuff, Jay has kindly offered us all the listeners here a promotional. Now, as he mentioned earlier, they have that digital conference coming up. It's a Indie Game Business digital conference, correct? Okay, that's coming up in September. I believe the time this launches, it's probably sometime in the summer or early summer, let's say. At least on my end, the kids are just getting out of school or approaching that. But so you got some time. Honestly, folks, I haven't quite outlined the specifics of this, but what Jay has done is given us some discount codes for that event. It's a great event. It's in there. You said the 17th event coming up, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So they've been doing it for a while. Lots of opportunities, networking, everything else. So if you're interested in that, just go to the show notes page. Again, the show notes page will be for just simplicity, rengenmarketing.com/353, because that is the episode number for this particular episode. Go there, go to the show notes. There will be some links, something there, and some directions so you know how to take advantage of those. Probably it's going to be a first come, first serve. He gave us a good number of them, but still we'll probably do it something like that. But if that changes for whatever reason, the info will be on the landing page. And Jay, thank you again for allowing our listeners to take advantage of that discount and just sharing that event with us and the community too, because it's a pretty helpful resource in addition to everything else Indie Game Business does. So,
and even if you're listening to this 3 years from now, we do 2 or 3 of these things a year. So just go to indiegamebusiness.com and the whatever the info on the next event will be up there.
Excellent. So Jay, again, thank you for that. But before we part, what are some links? What are ways people can reach out, connect, please?
So everything on the Indie Game Business side is at indiegame.business or indiegamebusiness.com. That's where you can find the publisher and investor list, links to our free online classes, episodes of our podcast, and our conference. Every single conference session that we have ever done and podcast we have ever done is linked on our YouTube page. And we even have it sorted by playlists. So if you just want to learn about marketing, there's a whole playlist. If you want to learn about whatever else, it's on there. Anything on the professional side, AKA the place where I actually make money instead of spend money, that will be on the Powell Group, powellgroupconsulting.com. That's where, we do work from indie devs and giving them feedback, helping them find publishers, doing market research, all the way up to, Fortune 500 companies. So we've got a lot of stuff that we do for a lot of different companies, but it's all basically around the business licensing and, production side more than anything else. But you can go to powellgroupconsulting.com. There's links there that show you this is what we do for developers. This is what we do for service providers. This is what we do for publishers and investors. But yeah, that's the main 2 places that you can go and find it.
All right, awesome. Well, again, appreciate everything. Great resources. And folks, as we talked about before, highly recommend you guys, checking out these things, especially Indie Game Business. What I'll do too, because I think it is open, I believe so, or I'll make sure to drop in the Discord link too.
Oh, yeah. That's discord.gg/Indie Game Business. And yeah, it's open. You don't need an invite. Okay,
great. So we'll drop that in there too. So if you're looking for another community to talk to some other fellow developers, studios, friends, and have just an array of resources to kind of help you with not just what we talked about today, but more, that's the place to go. Jay, can't thank you enough for today, the conversation. It's just been great to finally have you on the show.
I greatly appreciate it. It's nice being on the other side of the microphone where I don't have to come up with the questions. I don't get to do this very often, so I'm very excited.
Awesome. Hey, everyone. Thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners. And we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.